being useful, you know, I guess.
Okay. All right. So everybody, hello. My name is Davis from Eazl. If you don't know what Eazl is, it's eazl.co. And I'm here with Nick. Oops. I have to turn off my volume there on the YouTube channel because it's conflicting me. But anyway, if you don't know what Eazl is, we're an online school, and I'm here with my friend Nick. And Nick and I recently designed a careers in programming course. And Nick is a former head of talent acquisition. Correct me if I said that wrong, Nick, at Viacom. He now runs a company called Hone It, and he does recruiting for a number of startups, and mostly in the technical area. And Nick, did I get that right? Did I get your
Yep.
intro right?
Yep. I worked in kind of big companies in New York, helping recruit product and technology people, and then moved to the Bay Area to try to, wanted to get closer to technology and startups. So had the opportunity to kind of work at some fast growing startups and build recruiting teams and, scale companies there. And then now I do executive search, working on really interesting recs, technical and executive roles around the world with clients, in addition to the software company, Hone It.
So we're going to be talking about what the dynamics are in the world of programming languages, and primarily featuring Nick as an expert here. So Nick, why don't we start with you sharing a little bit about what you're seeing happening in terms of programming languages in demand. I know that off camera you said that some of these languages like Java are just like so important and durable that they last forever. But what are you seeing generally in terms of what people are looking for from developers?
Yeah, I think one of the changes has been, development teams, how development teams even work together, right? When you get to a team, an engineering organization of even several developers working together to hundreds or thousands of developers working together, everyone needs to be able to be focused on building certain parts of that without stepping on each other's toes, right? And so this idea, how can you be focused on adding this new feature here? How can we be upgrading the infrastructure over here? How can another team be building a new product idea over here, and without all of us kind of stepping on each other's code, right? Or pulling code out from one another, right? And so one of the things that's evolved is this idea around Git and GitHub, which you've probably heard of. GitHub was recently acquired by Microsoft for a big chunk of change, and GitHub is a way for developers to now pull code and work on code at the same time without, again, affecting the other person's work. So that's one of the big themes that's happened, and GitHub and things like that work with all languages, right? So you could be building something in Java, another team could be building something in Python, right? And that lets you do that. The other thing that's an interesting theme is that a lot of times you'll hear kind of front end or back end engineers, right? Front end developers are the ones that are building the user interfaces that we look at and we touch and click. So there's different languages that are associated with the front end, which could be like HTML and CSS and even JavaScript. And then there's languages on the back end, right? These are those kind of industrial strength C++ or Java or J2EE or Python. So I think I just wanted to set some context, and I'm sure there's some people who are already developers on the call, but that's one of the big things to start to think about is, you could be a front-end developer building the user interface, or you could maybe be an engineer that's focused on the back end. The most in-demand skill set, though, in the world of technology, I would say, is the folks that know both and can be good at can do front end and back end. And those folks are called full stack developers, right? Where they can work with the database, they can work on that back end system, and they can do some coding on the front. And one person essentially could build a web application themselves if they're a full stack developer. So a lot of times startups, really love that person who is flexible because things change at startups. And you can lend a hand on the back end if you need it. You can lend on the front end. So that's just kind of a quick intro in terms of kind of the world of programming.
Well, I mean, I guess from my perspective, for example, one thing I know is that data science is seeming to be explosive area of the economy. And I know that there's a few languages that are useful in data science. But for example, like as a recruiter and when you're working with tech companies, are you seeing people asking for data scientists? And I know one thing that's a discussion point in that area is like whether you are developing in R or if you're using something like SQL or Python.
Yeah, I mean, Python's the first one that came to mind when you started talking about data science. I think that's a Python is a relatively newer language compared to some of the C++ and stuff. But I, so yeah, when you're dealing with large data sets or working with Hadoop in terms of these giant uh, databases, right? We're talking about terabytes of data. Yeah, there's certain languages that work better in those environments, and Python's one of them. I think R, and when you start to talk about more statistical packages, right? Like maybe you have a system that's captured all of this data. It's now sitting somewhere, and now you maybe want to start to analyze it. That kind of gets into the world of more of these statistical packages or statistical languages where you can manipulate, analyze the data as well.
Are people really like, you know, for example, are data scientists more being demanded because they can go in and participate in making the incredible amounts of data that companies like Facebook sit on and many other companies we don't know about sit on, or is it more on the like marketing analysis and automation and stuff like that? Like, where are you seeing more demand happen? Is it this big data thing, or is it that like every company feels like they need to have build up their data muscles?
I think probably I mean, I think every company is trying to think about what in their company and or industry could they be measuring better. You know, what data may they have access to that they haven't been capturing yet that they could be or should be. So I think part of it's like a two-sided problem. One is like you just have to start capturing the data. Some companies are capturing and tracking everything, not even knowing what they might need, say 2 years from now, but at least they'll be capturing it so that they can analyze it if they need in the future. But if you're not capturing it, you can't analyze it now or in the future. So I think first is like, how do we build these systems to be a bit more inclusive? We're tracking clicks, we're tracking impressions on the web, right? All of this stuff. And then what's interesting is what you can do with it once you start capturing it.
So maybe, I guess from what I'm kind of deducing from you is like if engineers that are working on projects that are basically finding ways to capture and store data from whatever the relevant interface is, whether it's an app or something on the web, is that kind of like, is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, and that's where these we could call them back-end engineers. They want to make sure we're capturing everything and all that data is going into some sort of repository, right? Whether it's a MySQL database or an Oracle database or a Cloudera or Hadoop, you know, big data. We could call big data database. And then that's when those data scientists probably come in who say, okay, we've got this giant data lake, they might say, or multiple databases here, here, here. And they're the data scientists are the ones pulling what they need and trying to make sense of it, right? And that's kind of step one. Stage two is more when you start to talk about like machine learning, which is this whole other thing around data science. That's when you start pulling the data in and then using human computer like either natural language processing, machine learning to like let the algorithms try to figure out what you've got, right?
That definitely brings me to one of my questions I wanted to ask you, which is like, are you seeing organizations that you're working with actually putting things like machine learning into practice, like using things like Watson or other tools like that? Is that really happening yet, or have you seen it mostly just be like a kind of an idea that's out there with ads and things like
Yeah,
that?
well, I mean, certain industries are have been doing that for quite a while, right? The big web technology companies that you mentioned, I mean, they've been analyzing all of this at scale for a while. Advertising technology, right? Which stems from kind of the Google, but like I worked at a company called TwoMogul for a few years, and they were doing video advertising technology. So imagine all the clicks and real time ads that are, you know, bids. Essentially, it's an exchange. There's trillions of auctions, happening every day, right, on the web, and so just huge moats of data that can be analyzed to try to understand what's the right price for this ad versus that ad. How much is this eyeball value this ad versus this eyeball value in this ad. All of that's happening now already. behind the scenes. And then finance, fintech. I mean, that's another big one, right? Like real time trading and everything that's happening now with blockchain, right? I mean, all of that now is adding new
Well,
ways.
I'm going to admit it. I'm kind of a nerd, and I've been thinking about learning Solidity. I'm really interested in smart contracts,
Mm.
and I'm just wondering, like, are you hearing any of that stuff? I mean, I tend to get my mind so wrapped up in future stuff that I forget to be grounded in what people are actually using. But I mean, that's fintech. I think Solidity is if blockchain, particularly Ethereum network, is going to be part of the fintech thing, then Solidity is the language for that. Are you hearing anybody talking about Solidity in your network?
I work with a couple clients. One's in Helsinki that's building kind of a tokenized. It's a tokenized ICO accelerator. Where they're building a platform to launch ICOs essentially. Working with another company in SF that is a site where you can buy and sell cryptocurrencies. So working with a couple of these blockchain backed based companies, but I haven't heard that demand for that skill set quite yet. I think they're still trying to figure
What
out.
are they? What languages are they hiring for? Like, what kind of skills are the
Yeah, I
developers?
mean, kind of back to that full stack developers that we're looking at. I mean, they still want to build websites and portals to users can engage with or log in and do things with, and then backends. So JavaScript in terms of a language, JavaScript is a very powerful language now that can be both on the front end, um, you know, actions on the websites and things like that, and then even in the back end. But I think what we're seeing with JavaScript is there's all these new frameworks, and so there's, say, versions of JavaScript that someone could learn, whether it's React was actually created out of Facebook, is a framework of JavaScript that they developed. And so different big companies sometimes even create their own JavaScript frameworks that can be open sourced and anyone could potentially learn.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, so I mean, I guess it would help maybe to know a little bit about. Okay, let's follow on that then. I mean, are you seeing a demand for any particular framework? Do you think that these things are durable? Like, is it worth investing in learning a particular framework, or something you're seeing a lot of?
I mean, it kind of depends who's on the call, right? I think if individuals are transitioning want to transition into coding, right? So you're on the beginning of learning to code. I mean, I think the best thing and what people typically do is start with more of those front end technologies like HTML, CSS, just understand the kind of the makeup of a web page. That's probably where you'd want to start, kind of HTML, CSS, and then JavaScript. And then once you start to kind of understand the syntax and then the language, um, I would encourage people to try a C++ or a Java, which is one of these back-end languages that have been around for quite a while, kind of bulletproof tested. So I'd probably encourage people to start there. But yeah, JavaScript in general is a very powerful language. So you quickly want to kind of understand that, what it can do, and then you can go much deeper with JavaScript. And that's where these frameworks, like, I mean, there's a list. You could talk about Angular, JavaScript, Backbone, JavaScript, React, JavaScript, Meteor, JavaScript. Like, there's probably 8 to 10 kind of major JavaScript frameworks that you could learn. But I think they're similar enough where most developers we have some clients who say, hey, we need someone that knows React JavaScript, right? Because they're deep enough into it that they need someone that knows React. And so we really try to find someone that knows React. Some other companies, though, are more flexible. They say, hey, we're using React now, but it might not be the same in a year. So they're more looking for engineers who can, may have some exposure to React, but are more quick learners. And as long as they're strong JavaScript engineers, they can learn the syntax for a particular framework.
All right. I wanted to shout out Darius, who asked a question, and so he was asking if there was a solid full stack developer that was building a relatively light app. Like, how long do you think that it would take a full stack developer with some experience to do something like that, just to give them a sense of the lift of something like that?
It's I guess it really comes down to, like, what does this app do, right? I mean, I think, um, I would think these modern languages have made it so much easier, right, for an individual to create something and push it, right? It used to be buying database licenses and buying server space, and even 15 years ago, you'd have to buy and make all this investment to then be able to build something. Well, now there's so much free stuff. You can, you know, sign up with Amazon Web Services for free, connect it to GitHub, choose one of these frameworks, right? And I don't know, one person building a very basic app could probably do so in a couple weeks. That does this thing that and I think the other thing that these frameworks do is, I think the best way to visualize it is, imagine you could hand code a button, right? Like, hey, this is a button on a web page. Like, you could hand code that button. Like, hey, I want it to be 300 pixels by, or 75 pixels by 20 pixels, and you could code that. Or nowadays there's these UI libraries, for example, right? Bootstrap is a very popular one that Twitter introduced. So if you like the look and feel of Twitter, Twitter's basically makes those buttons and their look and feel and their fonts and all of that stuff just available. So you don't have to spend as much time coding buttons. You just use Bootstrap and use those kind of optimal buttons that we all know and love already. And so that's just an example of, in coding now, you don't necessarily have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to build everything from scratch. And so savvy developers kind of learn, hey, when to pull something that might have been built already, and then when we need to hand code something.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Nick. So you mentioned Git early on, and as a resume writing dude who manages a career hacking course and now careers in programming, and I want to let you guys know that there's a few discounted coupon code enrollments in the link in the description of the video if you want to check out the course that Nick and I worked on. But do you think that that's the kind of thing you'd want to see on a resume now? Is like, I know how to use Bootstrap, or I know how to use Git, I know how to collaborate in these new ways.
I think having those keywords on your resume are things that recruiters would probably be searching for, right? So if you're going to put your resume on your profile on LinkedIn, where recruiters are searching for you, if you're going to put your resume on Indeed, where recruiters are searching resumes for profiles, you want to put the words on a resume that, think about it from the recruiter or employer's perspective. That's kind of another way to look at a resume, but you want to write your resume with using the words and the vernacular that maybe even a non-technical recruiter would be using. But things like Git, that has really evolved the way companies and teams build products, right? So I would encourage every developer out there, or even anyone getting that hasn't coded, to create a Git account. Like, just look at it and get familiar with it and figure out how to incorporate that, even if you're coding by yourself. Because just
get familiar with it.
Like,
sorry, bad joke. Sorry, mess with your flow of the bad joke.
No, but I mean, just even if you're to Darius, who had to ask the question, like, even if you're coding a project by yourself, it'd probably be worthwhile, incorporating Git in some capacity, just because, like, when you start developing with other people, that's going to be this kind of way that coding happens in teams. So,
all right, let me ask you about just coding boot camps and the future of education stuff. We were talking a little bit off camera about this, and just in terms of, I think this can relate to programming languages, but do how do you think employers are handling people that are having alternative education now, going to boot camps, getting certificates, things like that?
I think companies are more open to it than they've ever been, right? We've heard some big announcements, even from the Googles of the world, that no longer making a degree a requirement. I mean, that's a huge change from even 5 to 10 years ago, where BABS used to be that kind of first bullet point on every job description, or at least for a lot of job descriptions. So the fact that they've started and said, actually, we've analyzed the data, and the people who are top performers in the company, we look back at their resume and they didn't have a degree. So I think that's a big shift. And then I think these boot camps are great ways for people who want to either learn new languages, maybe that they're not coding in their day job, but want to learn some more these new JavaScript frameworks, for example, we were talking about. It's a great way for them to dip their toes into new languages. it's also great for career changers, people that might want to get into technology, to not quit their day job because you still got to pay the bills, but in the evenings or weekends, you can be learning to code. And I think the one thing I would caution, though, is that as a recruiter now, we do see a lot of people who, do a 6-week, 9-week boot camp. And I think, I don't know that they're full stack developers yet, right? I don't know if 6 weeks is enough to say I'm a full stack developer and I'm ready to get a full-time job. So I think the trick now becomes with boot camp students is finding a way to position their knowledge or experience or work that they've been doing with some now newfound skills and figure out what could be that great step for them. And maybe it's getting their current company to give them a side project, or going and talking to the engineering team at your own company, and just starting those relationships about, hey, I'm coding, plant some seeds and figure out if there's a way to make a lateral move in your own company into more of a technical role. So I don't know that we've figured out, we've seen kind of that perfect, what a boot camp somewhat graduate can how they can naturally find that next job. But it shows that you're willing to learn. It shows that you're putting in extra effort. It's, which are all great traits in general for, that employers are looking for. I know this is kind of like a long answer to your question, but I think what a boot camp graduate can do is say, okay, I've learned HTML and CSS and a little bit of JavaScript, and I've been able to build this web app. I would encourage those boot camp graduates to now also learn Java, like go back and also now learn one of these more robust computer science languages that someone that received a computer science degree would have studied as well. And then I think you're really showing employers, you've gone beyond kind of the lightweight languages, and you've now committed to going deeper and expanding your technical skill set.
So it sounds to me like, just to sum up some things that I'm hearing from you, the first thing I heard from you in terms of the growth in programming languages is actually that it seems to me that one of the main things that's happening in this world is this movement towards collaboration and using Git and these different, I don't know, I've never used Asana and things like that, but I would assume that these project management collaboration softwares are increasingly important. It sounds to me like the other thing you said is that, I guess because development careers have been around for so long now, that a lot of, especially young companies, are looking for full stack developers. And then it sounds to me like the third thing you said is that maybe one thing that is increasingly the sort of ticket to the real world of coding, or at least it's in certain circles, is that one of these more hardcore languages like Java or like C++.
Yeah, and I think it's yeah, I think that's fair. I think I'm not trying to I don't want to discourage people from not learning, the modern Python languages or Ruby on Rails or JavaScript frameworks. Because those are very marketable now, and a lot of companies are looking for those. I would say in most of like the maybe the senior engineering roles that we're hired to, that we would look for, we get paid to find talent with these skill sets, is they're looking for, software engineers first, so people who have a craft and take learning and coding as a craft. They understand the underworkings of some of these languages, in addition to then knowing this particular framework that the team is already using. So there's a bit nuanced there. It's not just knowing the syntax, right? I think to architect a new system or build something from the ground up, you're always making choices. Do we do this or do we build it this way? Do we build it this way or do we build it this way? This could be great in the short term. This is going to take a little longer, but we won't have to build it again, right? There's all these trade-offs, and each language, and even choosing your languages is a trade-off, right? So I think people with just more experience have probably seen, if A and B, watch out for C and D. I know where that limitation is going to happen, because I've seen it. And that just comes with experience. And I think learning a Java, learning a C++ or a Java, those things have been just tried and tested to be more scalable in certain areas than other languages. So
yeah, it seems to me that C++ and Java are like learning how to make broth. You know, because I love cooking, and I can tell you that I've been cooking for 15, 20 years, and I'm just now dabbling into how to make a good broth, because that's
Wow, there you go.
the soup, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and a lot of these newer languages have taken, what's worked well in previous languages, right? And I mean, I'm sure there's a chart out there that kind of shows, hey, C and C++ are here and Java's here, and then, you know, the children and grandchildren of those languages, right? So
Yeah, the family tree of languages.
family
Well,
tree.
thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Nick, for your time today. I appreciate it. And if you guys want to check out the course that Nick and I built for you on careers in programming, please do. You can find it in the link in the description of the video. All right, Nick, thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.